Thanks a lot, John. Yeah, hi everyone. Fantastic to see you all here again at the OCP Global Summit. A lot of familiar faces. We're in a slightly smaller room this time, so everyone's closer together, which is nice. Today I'm going to be talking about immersion fluid guidelines, specification, and lifecycle management. So this is a committee update on the Fluids Committee. For those of you who saw the last talk, you'll understand what that is. If not, I'll explain as we go. But before we get into kind of the progress updates on what's happening in the various work streams, I just wanted to start off on kind of a same base, right? So the first thing I want to mention is the growth in the space of fluids over the last 5 years. So I think everyone's talking about this growth in OCP as a whole, growth in data centers, in AI, et cetera. This has really been reflected as well in immersion in the fluid space. So in 2019, we had maybe a couple of vendors that were selling immersion-specific fluids, maybe 5 fluids in total. And by my count, this year there's well over 100 immersion tailor-made immersion fluids on the market from at least 30 to 50 vendors. So this is fantastic news for people looking to adopt immersion, right? You have a lot more choice, a lot more supply of fluids. But it also obviously creates other challenges. And so this is kind of a follow-up to some of the challenges that Rolf touched on in the project overview. So what I've got here are a series of questions around the fluid, which probably most of you have asked at some point in time. So just as an example of a few of those, so which fluid should I use? How do I use them safely? What standards do they need to comply with? And how do I safely dispose of them afterwards? So at the core of this, and again, it's touching on a common theme, at the core of this, there's currently a lack of guidance and standards about immersion fluids. And so that's really what the Immersion Fluids Committee is all about. It's about filling those gaps and providing to the rest of the community guidance and specifications on fluids. So the scope includes, in more detail, definitions, use and management of fluids in immersion systems, the selection, testing, and standardization of cooling fluids, and also generally working to ensure that fluid solutions are efficient, sustainable, and align with the latest industry standards and environmental guidelines. Again, this is another familiar image for a lot of you, the new restructure of the immersion project. So I just wanted to point out again that the Fluids Committee is one of 4 committees now within the immersion project. And the idea of this restructure is as we grew and grew and grew and the project got bigger and bigger and bigger, it became harder to really, drill down into some of the details, some of the specifics, which is what you really need to do to put out those new standards and guidelines, right? So by creating this new structure, we can now effectively manage at the same time aligning all the different activities because everything's linked at the end, right? The fluid is everywhere. It touches on everything. But at the same time, we don't need the day-to-day visibility that some of the other guys are doing, right? And so as part of this new committee structure, as part of the new Fluids Committee, we have a number of new workstream volunteer leads. So I just want to thank those new leads. Well, some of them have been participating for some time. Others are new. So I'm going to talk through some of their efforts so far in a minute. The other thing I wanted to point out, following up from some of the discussion in the bazaar, is it's not as bad as it seems, right? I know I mentioned there's currently a lack of guidance and standards, and that's true, but we are making progress towards filling some of those gaps. So here I just want to point out existing documentation that I think it's a must-read for anyone who's interested in in immersion fluids or immersion in general. These are really must-read documents right now that have been put out into the OCP community. The first one of those is it's a sections within the requirements document, and this has become kind of a Bible in a sense of covering all of the immersion community. And there are a couple of chapters in there, some of you will be familiar with them, that cover fluid specifications, what you might want to look at in a fluid data sheet, as well as some minimum requirements for immersion fluids. There's an ongoing revision here that I wanted to point out, which is this is being driven in the solutions committee in the requirements work stream. I think, again, a lot of you are already aware of that, participating. If you're not, I highly encourage you to get involved in that discussion as well. Now is the perfect time to contribute to the new revision. The second document, which I think is relevant as well to some of the previous discussions, is material compatibility in immersion fluids. And this is a document that was released 2 years ago. And as Samantha explained earlier, this is now being managed within the reliability space. But the thing I want to point out here is, again, there's an ongoing revision. So now's the perfect time for anyone who's interested in this to contribute. We have a new document that's not quite public, which is Immersion Fluid Safe Handling Guidelines. So Spencer Kearns will be giving a brief talk in a little bit on that, so I'll let him explain more what that's about. But that's going to be really key to bridging that gap between the chemistry and the chemical safety of these fluids and bringing them into the data center. We also have the Intel OCP-based fluid specification, which was released last year. So this is the first immersion fluid specification that was released to the community. So another key document, I think, for everyone to look at. And then lastly, I'm mentioning this here, it's actually quite an old document that was released 4 or 5 years ago, and this is the Design Guidelines for IT Equipment in Immersion. So this also touches on issues like compatibility and from the design point of view, from the IT equipment designer point of view, what are the types of material selections that I could make to optimize and hopefully eventually create from scratch an immersion system. And so last thing I want to point out is all of this documentation can be accessed, downloaded on the OCP Immersion wiki. And now I'm going to take you through some of the progress on the active work streams. So currently we have 4 active work streams from this year in the Fluids Committee. We have safe handling guidelines, fluid lifecycle management, oxidation methodology, and the cleaning methodology. And fortunately, this year we were able to actually have some of those work stream leads come up on stage and present that work. So what I'm going to give here is just a brief snapshot, a teaser of what that's about. If you're interested in this type of content, then I encourage you all to stick around and listen to the leads themselves speak about it. So teaser on oxidation methodology, what's this about? The problem statement here is really, at the moment, we don't have a consistent way of quantifying oxidation in immersion fluids. So a lot of people ask, how long does a fluid last? And it's a bit of a tricky question. We know from evidence in the field, I'd say, that they're going to last for a very long time. But in terms of actually putting a number to that and comparing fluids, et cetera, we don't have a consistent method to do that. So Ken Hope will be giving a talk on this straight after this one. So he'll explain this topic better. We've also got Spencer Kearns, who'll be taking over the leadership from Ken, and Vanya Bond, who'll be leading this. And that touches on really what is oxidation in the first place, how does it happen? What's really interesting as well is looking at the other standards that are available today, seeing which ones might be applicable, which ones less applicable. And I think the most interesting piece of information to me is they've actually gone to the trouble of reaching out to vendors and gathering data from the field, from real immersion deployments, and looking at those changes over time in those fluids. So stick around for Ken's talk if you're interested in knowing more. Next we have fluid lifecycle management. So this is being led by Chris Fletcher and Brandon Marshall. And this is a really fundamental question to everything we're doing, right? Sustainability is obviously a big push for adopting immersion. But at the same time, we know the fluid has to be managed properly for the overall solution to be sustainable. So how can we safely and sustainably dispose of or recycle an immersion fluid? That's at the core of this. And Brandon and Chris will be talking about different methods to dispose or recycle of fluids, pros and cons of each, and also looking across the different types of fluids there. The third rapid fire talk we have is on safe handling guidelines. So this is a white paper which has been submitted to the steering committee. Spencer Kearns will be giving the talk here. And so this is all about providing guidelines and best practices for managing the safe handling of all the different types of fluids, so hydrocarbons, esters, and fluorinated liquids. And in a nutshell, it's really about bridging that gap between the knowledge that the chemists have and the knowledge that the day-to-day data center operators need to safely handle, store, etc., immersion fluids in the data center. And then the last work stream, which we've kicked off this year, is about cleaning guidelines. And I think you've already seen what I put on the slide. This is kind of the elephant in the room, right? One of the main challenges with adopting immersion is messy, or it can be if it's not properly managed. But we're here to help, right? So this is all about the cleaning aspect of it. So the problem statement is, there are no guidelines or standard procedures for cleaning immersion fluids from IT equipment. And in this case, I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into this one today. It's a relatively new topic, so I want to present some of the work that's been done so far on this. Just a couple more things before I do that, though. So this is kind of the overview, again, of those active work streams. There will be one or two more popping up. There's already been a teaser of one of those on fluid specifications. So at the end, you'll get the QR code again if you haven't already scanned it to sign up to the mailing list for the updates. And then the other really exciting thing that's happened this year, and this is starting to get into the solution space as well, is the OCP marketplace listing for immersion fluids. So over the years, there have been a lot of people who have been asking for some kind of approval process or listing of their fluids in OCP. I know there are a lot of fluid vendors active here. I know a lot of you have been reading these documents, following them, trying to adapt your offerings to immersion, to the OCP immersion fluid guidelines. But now for the first time, we're actually offering a process that lets you have us qualify and approve your fluid and ultimately list that on the OCP marketplace. So that's, like I mentioned, being driven by Amy Short and the Solutions Committee. The Fluids Committee is participating to obviously help out with the qualification process. And as some of you might know, we actually already have one of those fluids qualified. That's from Fuchs. And we also have a talk later today in the afternoon by Brian Kincaid from Fuchs to explain and share some of his experiences in going through that process. I guess the trials and tribulations, and I guess if this is something you're interested in, then I definitely encourage you to attend Brian's talk later. If you're also interested in following up on this, then please contact Amy and myself. Okay, so now I wanted to do that deep dive on this new workstream effort, which kind of have just kicked off in the last couple of months around fluid cleaning guidelines. So I guess the starting point here is, why is cleaning important? Why are we talking about this at all? Some of you might know why already. Others, it's not obvious. So really, many of the fluids we use today in immersion cooling, especially in single-phase immersion cooling, are oils, essentially, right? And they have these properties. They don't evaporate quickly at room temperature. They're quite viscous compared to a fluid like water. And they have a low surface tension and contact angle, which means that they spread really easily on the surfaces of the IT equipment. So it's a mess to deal with, right? I think a lot of us are familiar with that. Before we talk about how we might clean fluids from IT equipment, I also want to mention avoiding cleaning in the first place, right? When do you actually have to need to clean? A lot of the maintenance and day-to-day operations can be done in situ without having to clean a server. I think that's worth pointing out. But there will definitely be situations where cleaning is necessary, and I've listed a few here. Things like RMA processes, shipping components, long-term storage, those types of things. So the first starting point when we put this work stream together is a few of us started sharing what we're doing today, right? And so these are some of the images I took. I think it was one of my colleagues from Submer shared kind of the different techniques that we'd been using to clean IT components, whole servers. And this is just a snapshot, but you already get the sense of, okay, there are very varied procedures, techniques. Again, depending on the volume that you might need to clean, if it's a single card versus a single server versus 100 nodes. It can be very varied, right? And we shared this. Then we started receiving feedback from others, like Unicom, Austin, shared some of their experiences, their techniques. And very quickly we realized everyone's kind of doing their own thing here, right? Everyone's doing very different stuff. So there's definitely a need to maybe put our heads together and share some common findings here. In terms of, so one of the things we also talked about initially was cleaning solvent selection, and this was a discussion that actually came from some of the safety guidelines earlier. So the solvents that you might use to remove some of these fluids, here's a list here. So you have alcohol-based solvents, which can be quite nice in the sense that they evaporate quickly, right? That's a good trait. But then they have some disadvantages in that they're more flammable. They also produce more vapors because they evaporate faster, and this can create, obviously, also safety concerns. Other types of solvents people use are hydrocarbon-based solvents. So they have the advantage of also being dielectric. They're similar to the fluids that you might use. There are less vapors, generally a lower flammability risk, but they do evaporate slower as well. Fluorinated fluids, this is another class of solvents that people are using. They can also be dielectric, evaporate quickly like the alcohols without having the flammability risk. But there are potentially regulatory issues that you might run into, and the cost can be high as well. I think the consensus around water-based was fairly clear. Some people are using water-based degreasers, but I think the general consensus there was that was not a good idea because they're not dielectric. So any small remains of the degreaser will subsequently contaminate the fluid afterwards. They also evaporate fairly slowly and are conductive, right? So the next thing we did was we got together and with this common base we started brainstorming. What are all the different things we need to take into account with cleaning? What are all the things we can kind of think of when the topic of cleaning comes up, cleaning immersion fluids? And so this is just to kind of show, obviously, not to read through it, but just to show you the kind of exercise that we typically do in these types of work streams, just to give you a sense of if I want to get involved in this in the future, how would this work? And so we got all of the ideas on one page. Then we started to arrange them into different categories, right? And that's when the clearer picture of what we're going to do started to emerge. So we started looking at, can we talk about group chemical specifications, HSE concerns, etc. And I'll talk about those in a minute. And then obviously we did this division of in scope and out of scope, right? So I'm going to zoom in on that now. And this is kind of a lot of text, so I apologize for that. But just going through this fairly quickly. So the plan at the moment is to organize a white paper with the following sections. So in scope, we have chemical specifications, where we're going to define the properties and performance requirements of cleaning fluids. And I think so far, based on the contributions, this will mostly be focused on hydrocarbon and ester-based fluids, but we obviously welcome any contributions from other types of fluids as well. We want to try and address material compatibility between cleaning fluids and ITE, right? So it's not just that the immersion fluid itself has to be compatible, but any cleaning fluid also has to be compatible with all the materials you use. Equipment specifications, so like we saw in the photos previously, there can potentially be diverse range of equipment that you might use here, whether it's tubs, tanks, custom-made tanks, vapor degreasers are another type of technology people use. So we want to have some, I guess, at least high-level specifications around those equipment. And also guidelines around storage of solvents and spent fluids and things like that. The next section is operational protocols. So we want to define the day-to-day methodology of actually applying these fluids, depending on which technique you're going to use. Procedures for then drying the IT equipment afterwards. We also want to look at regulatory compliance. Clearly there are going to be some regulatory issues around storage, etc. So we need to look at that. And then finally we have the health and safety and environmental concerns, right? That's obviously going to be a big section of this document. And then I wanted to touch on briefly what's out of scope, right? Because that's equally important. And these things, it doesn't mean that we'll never get to these. It's just for the current effort for this initial document, these are the things we're going to put to the side. So things like handling and cleanup of spills outside the cleaning tank within the facility, right? So we're not going to talk about if an immersion tank spills, how do you clean that up? We're just focused more on the IT equipment. We're not going to get really deep into the types of machines, for example, vapor degreasers either, or come up with specifications for those at this point. Like I mentioned before, the focus is more on hydrocarbons and esters at this point, but if there are contributions coming from fluorinated fluids, we can manage with those as well. And following on from that, management of the two-phase residues as well, right? And then lastly, we're not going to really delve into the cleaning maintenance of the tanks themselves, of the cleaning tanks. So like I said before, a few different work and deliverables will be coming from this. Really the key things here are the white paper, I think, which is what everyone's going to read in the end. The recommendations on all of the items in scope that I just discussed. Okay, and this is again a bit of a wall of text, kind of just taking this from the proposal, but really we are still looking for input from the community. We've got a decent squad together working on this, but if you are interested in this and you fall in one of these categories, then definitely we would be interested in your contributions, so feel free to reach out. Okay. And then, yeah, I just wanted to flash up here the roster that we have of the current participants, and I noticed there have been a few new signups already to the work stream, so that's great, and I'm sure this will be growing day by day. Again, if you want to subscribe to this, you can scan the QR code, or you can go onto the wiki page and you'll find the link there. And then, yeah, just to wrap up now, if any of this has interested you, if you want to keep up to date with all the progress, here's the QR code for the mailing list of the entire Fluids Committee. You can also find, like I mentioned before, any of those documents on the Immersion wiki. You'll find the links to the calls and the mailing list subscription all on the wiki page. And that's it from me, so thank you all for listening in.